Hi guys, this is Seth Christensen with the Got Any Cows podcast. 20 years ago, I was an 11-year-old kid with 2 bucket calves. Today, we have sent genetics from our company to 40 of the 50 states and 12 countries around the world. I still learn more every day, and I invite you to learn along with me. We're here today on another episode of the Got Any Cows podcast. I'm here with my friend Stu Wamsley. We're here on Kearl Ranch. We just finished breeding 240 or so heifers, AI in them here again this year. This be the 11th year that we've done that, and I've always been lucky counted myself lucky to get to come and enjoy a couple of days with Stu each spring and his family here breeding these heifers, and thought we'd take advantage of the opportunity to sit down and get a feel for your ranch and the story of it, Stu, and kind of how it came to be, and then how we ended up here, AI and heifers, all these years later. But if you would, Stu, maybe just introduce yourself quick, and then we'll go right back to the beginning of kind of how the ranch came to be, if that's all right.
Okay. Well, it's fun to be here, and I really appreciated Seth coming for those 11 years. He's done a great job on the AI, and it's kind of interesting how I happened to come here. My wife's great-grandfather came into this valley in 1863.
Okay.
With his 3 wives.
Oh, really? So,
yeah.
So your great-grandfather or Diane's great-grandfather? Diane's great-grandfather. Yeah. Okay.
Uh-huh.
And he had 3 wives when he came in. Okay.
And he kind of scattered them out in this area.
Uh-huh.
And had a bunch of kids. But when time come for him to bow out, it was Diane's grandfather that he wanted to stay and run the place.
Okay.
And so his name was Alfred Kearl.
Okay.
And he is the one that named it the Kearl Ranch.
Now, I think, is his name on the mantle right in here in the hunting lodge?
Uh-huh.
Yeah. So he was Diane's great-grandfather.
And Alfred is her grandfather.
Alfred's her grandfather.
James
okay.
is the
great-grandfather.
Mm-hmm.
So when the great-grandfather had the 3 wives, kind of scattered them throughout, was that all right here in Round Valley, or is that up to Lake Town, or further out to like Woodruff and Randolph? Or
Well, they didn't go to as far as Woodruff and Randolph, but there were some of them that lived in this area. There was one that lived kind of up in the mountains between here and Randolph.
Okay, yeah.
And it's kind of interesting, some of the stories they tell about him. One of his wives, and I think it was Diane's great-grandmother,
mm-hmm.
He built a house for her right along where the highway goes now.
Okay.
And there's a couple of trees that are still growing there that were planted by him.
Okay.
But he had a lot going. He was really busy. He got the cabin built, but he never got around to building the door. And so she spent the first winter with a blanket over the door.
Oh, no.
And it had to be very, very frosty.
Oh, what is, a normal winter here, how cold do you get?
Well, it's not so bad now. We get, 0, sometimes as cold as 20 below.
Mm-hmm.
But years ago, 30 below was fairly common.
Oh, wow.
The weather has moderated quite a bit.
Uh-huh.
I remember, I actually grew up in Woodruff.
Uh-huh.
And I remember one time going to school, the bus came along, it was 40 below.
Oh.
And our front door shut, and I couldn't get it open in time to catch the bus.
They didn't call off school for the 40 below.
No, it was do or die.
Well, you're going to get educated one way or another.
Yeah, right.
How deep does the snow, or did the snow get back when you mentioned a little more extreme weather further back?
There were some years where it was really deep. Most, though, it was like a couple of feet.
Yeah.
2 or 3, somewhere there.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
So Diane's great-grandmother would have been dealing with maybe 30 below and a couple of feet of snow with a blanket for a door.
Right, yeah. So it was a tough life for those people.
Yes, sir.
They were tough.
That's a tough breed of people, absolutely.
And when Diane's great-grandfather moved into this area, there were a lot of Indians.
Oh, really?
And, of course, they were antagonistic toward the whites.
Sure.
But James moved in, and there was a lot of pressure on him, but he says, I'm not going anywhere.
Uh-huh.
And so he stayed.
Yeah.
There was, of course, a lot of others that moved in that didn't stay.
Yeah. Yep. Yep. So Alfred would be, so James was the great-grandfather of Diane, your wife. Then you can get down to Alfred. And did Alfred build, or he was part of the group that built this hunting lodge that we're sitting at right now?
He was involved with it because it was built mainly by his business associates in Logan,
Okay.
in that area.
Yeah.
But if you look on the mantle, there's a deal there that says who built it and the year. And Alfred was to be the president.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if you look around our farmstead, you can see that, I don't know about James, but Alfred and Diane's dad, Delmas, were great builders. They loved to build buildings. And just down off of here is the old sawmill that originally was powered by water.
Oh, really? Right on this waterway that's back behind me.
Yeah.
What is that? What is that water? Is that, I don't even know what we're sitting on right there. What is that? What waterway is that?
Well, it's they call it Big Spring. Is just over this way about a quarter of a mile.
Okay.
And it runs this canal and one like it that this one goes around Round Valley. This other one that goes north goes around to Meadowville.
Okay.
And then down below it there is a third and a fourth canal that is lower, and they go the same way to Round Valley and to Meadowville. So it's a wonderful spring.
Yeah.
And it's really been a lifesaver.
So that water source that's flowing down through there at one point powered a sawmill, and they were taking lumber, trees all the way through to building with them.
They used to go to the west here to a place called Temple Flat.
Okay.
And my dad-in-law Delmas said that the people from Laketown, the men, would leave about 5 in the morning with their teams and sleighs, and they would sleigh up onto the forest, up to an area called Temple Flat, and they would spend most of the day loading their sleighs with logs. And he says most of the time it was about 10 o'clock when they pulled in here at night. So they'd pull in, unload the logs, and then head to Laketown for the rest of the night.
Wow. So when they were going up and doing it, were they doing that in the winter? You mentioned sleighs.
Yeah.
Wow, going up on the hill in the winter.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's a fearless generation of folks. So even going back, I guess, prior to that, so you mentioned, so Delmas would be your wife's father.
Yeah.
Alfred was ahead of him, and James was the generation prior to that. Were they running cows right at this location, right through all those generations, or what did the ranch look like as it kind of came down through there?
Well, originally they were running sheep.
Okay.
And then Diane's dad, Delmas, and his brother Lowell talked to Dad into letting them get some milk cows.
Okay.
And so then they started to milk cows, and they never had a big dairy, but they had a few cows.
Sure.
And most people in this area did. And so there was a milk truck that would come around and pick up the 10-gallon cans full of milk. And Delmas and Ruby lived in Laketown. So he'd ride his horse over here in the morning, milk the cows, work all day, milk the cows at night, and then he had a bucket with a lid on it, and he'd carry some milk home to his family back in town.
So Delmas was in town when
they were first married.
Here. Okay.
Yeah.
So at what point in time, we're sitting here at the hunting lodge right on the ranch, and then your home and Greg's home are both just right here. Walk me through kind of how that came to be, from it going from just being open ground and then the buildings coming to be. At what point in time did those come along?
Well, the house where Greg lives, which is the smaller of the two houses, the one on the west, part of it is an old log cabin, and they built it first. And Alfred, then they built the big house.
Okay.
Alfred and his wife lived there, and Delmas's brother Cecil and his wife and family lived where Greg lives.
Okay, gotcha.
And Cecil got, it was an appendicitis or something like that struck him and killed him.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and so that left his wife and a bunch of kids, but they moved to town, and she got a job with the school district.
Okay.
And so that left this house empty, and so Delmas and Ruby moved in there.
Gotcha.
And then they lived there until the kids got to where they were coming along. Delmas and Ruby had 4 daughters, and Alfred finally said to him, those kids, they need more room to run around. We've got to change houses.
Mm-hmm.
And so they did.
Gotcha.
And so Diane spent most of her younger years in the
home you're in now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
So of these 3 buildings, what do you know roughly what years each of these 3 would have gone up? Because this one is early 1900s somewhere, like I want to say 1912 maybe.
I think it's like 1932.
Oh, you're probably right.
But I'm not
right.
sure.
I should have looked. We just walked past it coming out here.
So that's when this one was built.
Yeah.
And I wish I knew when those others were built.
Would they have been before or after, do you think, relative to this building here?
I think they would have been before.
Before that.
Uh-huh.
Okay. And this one, did anyone ever live in this one? Or has this always been a hunting lodge?
It's always been a hunting lodge.
Always been a hunting lodge, right through from 1932, almost 100 years.
Yeah.
Huh. Oh, that's neat.
Hunting was a pretty big deal here. Delmas, my father-in-law, told me about one time when some people come and wanted him to guide them up in the mountains to see if they could get a deer.
Yeah.
And so he talked to his dad, and his dad agreed. And he went up there, and they got these people a nice buck. And when they got it, the guys pulled out a $50 bill and gave to Delmas for his efforts.
Uh-huh.
And Delmas was so excited about having the little money that he put it in his pocket, but left it in his hand in his pocket. He said he didn't dare pull his hand out of his pocket for fear he'd lose the money. So money was pretty scarce in those days.
Yeah. So, and I apologize, I'm jumping a little around, but just getting a feel for the timeline and how it came to be. So Alfred would have made his living primarily from sheep still at that point in time.
Yeah.
And then coming down to Delmas, Delmas was working the sheep and then started just the first few of the cows. As far as what he did for a living, or am I off on my timeline there?
That's right. Okay. But there's a couple of experiences that I might tell you about Alfred and the sheep.
Yeah.
They had some range that was out east of Bear Lake.
Okay.
And so when it got to be the first part of May, they would have the sheep already lambed out here, and they would start to drive them toward the East Hills. As they went through Lake Town, they'd stop in the school and get their sons Delmas and Lowell out, and they would go with the sheep, and that's the last they ever made it back to school that year. Yeah. And another experience that Delmas told me about that's kind of interesting is he says his dad, Alfred, bought a herd of sheep up in Idaho. Uh-huh. And so he hauled Delmas and Lowell up there, and they got the sheep and started them this way. And then Alfred just said, "I'll see you when you get home." And so they trailed the sheep on foot all the way home. And he says when they got to St. Charles, it was starting to get dark, and they knew they needed a place to put them for the night. So as they were going along the road, they look up ahead, and there's a guy crossing the road with a milk bucket. So one of them run up around the herd of sheep and told him that, we've got this herd of sheep, and we need a place to put them for the night. Is there any place you might have that we could do it? And the man says, "Sure, you can put them in this field right here, and I'll take you to my house and give you some supper." And so they put them in the field and went to the house to get the supper. And after they had got the supper, then his wife pulls out the bathtub and fills it with warm water. And then she said, "Now each of you boys need to take a bath." And she said, "Don't worry about it if you have trouble getting you clean, because I've bathed a lot of little boys, and I can sure take care of you." And so they took the bath, went to bed. In the morning they got up and she gave them a little breakfast, and they got around the sheep and come from St. Charles here to Lake Town.
Wow. Wow. How old would they have been?
Well,
do you know?
they wouldn't have been too old, I don't think, because if they were, I don't think the woman would have offered to bathe.
I'd imagine you're right. That is something. Do you know how far north they'd have started up into Idaho? when they
You know,
started
I
traveling
wish
down?
I did.
Yeah, yeah, but quite a ways. I mean,
Yeah.
if they were just getting to St. Charles by nighttime, you're still a little ways from, quite a little ways from there to here if you're on foot.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
I mean, wow, that's incredible.
And one time when they stopped at the school and got the boys out of school with the sheep, they got the boys started with the sheep for the East Hills. And when they got out there with the sheep, they never had anything to eat or drink.
The boys did?
The boys didn't.
Oh,
And
no.
they were alone with the sheep. And so a rancher from the east side of the lake came along and he says, I can see you boys are starving to death. So he went back to his house and got some food for them and brought it to the herd of sheep and these boys.
Wow. Wow, that's a whole different era,
Yeah.
you know?
And here's another story that kind of demonstrates what life was like.
Yeah.
The rancher that got him the food, his name was Hiram Nebaker. He had a lot of land out east. And one winter he talked Alfred and Delmas into wintering a bunch of horses for him. And he said, now I only want you to feed them straw. Don't feed them any hay. He says, they won't like the straw, but they'll eat it. And he says, by spring, some of them will have died. But he says, I've got a lot of horses, and I can afford to lose a few on the straw. Times were different back then.
That was a different deal.
Yeah.
A different deal.
And Delmas told me, he says, you know, we just couldn't bear to see those horses get thin on that straw, so we ended up feeding them the hay.
Oh. Are there any other stories in particular that come to mind of Alfred at that point in time? Or should we jump down to Delmas and that generation?
Alfred was a very stern man.
Oh.
And Delmas told me about one time that he and his dad Alfred went to town with just a sleigh and team. And he says when they got, there used to be a store over in town right there by where the stop sign is. Mm-hmm. When they got to that store, there was a man came out of the store and stopped him and said, hey, I'm looking for work. Is there a chance that you have some work that I could hire on and do for you? And Alfred said, well, what can you do? And this guy said, well, I can feed straw to sheep. And Alfred, knowing that you don't feed straw to sheep, turned to Delmas and said, let's go. Never said a word to the guy. Delmas said, I felt bad for that guy.
Oh, that's funny. So, Alfred, let's see. So I'm only repeating mostly to keep the line straight in my head.
Don't worry about it.
So James is the one that first came, and I guess even jumping back behind that real quick. Do you know where James would have been born or come from? Where did James come here from? Just to jump
I think
that
it was
in,
England.
England. So it came over from England.
And first
made it
they
all the way
settled
to
in
here.
Tooele.
Oh, really?
And then
okay.
they were asked to come up here.
Oh, really? Okay. All right. They got the better end of that deal. I wouldn't want to be in the West Desert either.
No.
So James comes up here, settles, has the 3 wives, jumps down to Alfred. Alfred's running sheep here.
Yeah.
And then transitioning between Alfred and Delmas. Any stories that come to mind of your father-in-law, Delmas, and kind of how his career took shape, transitioning from starting with all sheep with his father, and then where did he take it during the time that Delmas was running the ranch?
Well, Delmas and his brother accumulated some milk cows.
Yeah.
And it's kind of interesting because my wife, Diane, milked them all through school.
Okay.
She'd have to get up early in the morning. And when Diane went to college, they sold the milk cows. But through all this, they had the sheep. but maybe a few cows, but not many, if any. But the predators just became so bad.
Oh, really? What kind of
The
predators?
coyotes were just so
Coyotes.
thick
Okay.
that they could see that, they just couldn't compete with the coyotes.
Interesting.
So they ended up selling the sheep. When we got married, they had about 300 sheep left.
Mm-hmm.
And we found a guy in Woodruff that would summer them.
Mm-hmm.
And that fall, they sold them all.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Huh. So Delmas, during the time he managed the ranch, it was still primarily sheep. So did Delmas add cattle?
Yeah.
Or did that end up being more you and Diane that
No,
added the
that
cattle?
was,
That was Delmas.
That was Delmas.
Okay. What did that look like? How did they get that transition accomplished to get over into cattle? How'd they get in?
I'm not exactly sure just exactly how that happened.
Yeah.
Because they were all set up for sheep. And so, I'd have thought maybe they'd have stuck with it and tried to, but the coyotes were just so thick. You could ride up in these ranges and, it was not uncommon to see one of those cyanide guns that the government trappers would set out to try and get the coyotes.
Yeah.
The coyotes are really, really smart.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Huh. Interesting.
So anyway, they got some cattle, and they had a herd of registered Herefords.
Oh, really? Delmas did?
Yeah.
Okay.
And then they got into the beef, the other Herefords, just the commercial Herefords.
Uh-huh.
But by the time I came along, the sheep herd was pretty well gone.
Yeah. Yeah. What would the timeline be there, Stu, as far as kind of when you started coming into the family, I guess, how long, walk us through a little bit of that story at large, I guess. I mean, obviously the ranch was here. Delmas was here running it. He's raising Diane here on the ranch, milking some cows, running some sheep. And then at some point in time, you got introduced to Diane. Walk us through how that came to be.
Well, when I got out of high school, I went to Utah State University for 1 year, and then I went on my mission.
Okay. Where'd you serve?
To the northern states.
Yeah.
Which was Iowa, Illinois, and Wisconsin.
Okay.
Parts of Iowa and Wisconsin.
Yeah.
And then when I came home, I went back over to Utah State. And one day, my roommate, who was also from Woodruff, and I were messing around, and there was a girl that was in my grade in school in Randolph.
Okay.
And she had Diane with her, and of course we didn't know Diane. But we went over and started talking to the girls, and my friend says, well, let's get him and go do something with him. And I said, well, which one do you want? And he said, well, he'd take Linda. And I said, well, that's okay. I'll take Diane.
Yeah, yeah.
So that's how we really met. And Diane had 3 other sisters.
Okay.
And by this time, Diane was a little younger than the others. So
Okay.
she was going to college, but none of the others were. They were out.
Okay.
But we got to dating a bit and fell in love and got married in the temple in 1967.
There in Logan?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, in Salt Lake, I mean.
Oh, in Salt Lake.
Salt Lake.
Oh, really? I didn't realize that.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so that next summer, we were kind of looking around for a job and wondering what to do. And Diane's older sister suggested to her parents, why don't you hire Stu and Diane? Mm-hmm. And so they did.
Okay.
And we've just been there ever since.
Really?
Yeah.
So going to Utah State there, what were you studying there? And did you finish all the way through or just do a couple years and then come right here to the ranch?
Yeah, I graduated in animal science.
Okay, yeah, yep.
And Diane graduated in elementary ed.
Mm-hmm. You bet.
And so, yeah, we both finished.
You both finished there and then went to work here coming right out of college that same year?
Mm-hmm.
Huh. What did the ranch look like that day? I mean, like at the point in time, you and Diane are newly married, fresh out of Utah State, you've got your degrees, this is the first job out of college.
Yeah.
What did the ranch look like when you rolled up the drive we've just rolled up today? What did the ranch look like at that point?
Well, of course, it's always been well kept.
Yeah.
And so it looked nice, but, You know, you just kind of wonder how close you want to be to your in-laws when you start married life. You know?
That's a valid question. Yeah, yeah.
And so there was a little, little reluctance
Sure.
there.
Yeah.
But when we got married, we weren't quite out of school. We had another year or two, and so we worked the summer here.
Gotcha.
Then went back and finished, and then came back here.
Okay, so you'd have been summers here in Round Valley, and then you'd have been school year over to Logan until you finished up. And then once you finished, you were here all the time. Which of the homes would you have been in at that point? How was that set up?
Well, by then, Diane's grandparents had passed away, so the house where Greg lives was empty.
Gotcha. Okay.
And so we moved in there, but Delma said, now there isn't enough room for a family in there, so we built on a little more.
So you added on to that home. It wasn't the size it is now when you and Diane first moved
Well,
in.
yes, but it was definitely Delma's.
Uh-huh.
I was there, but I just more or less got in the way. He was a good builder, real good.
It's about all I've ever done anywhere I've been to. I've been present, while things got done. So you move in there and walk us through kind of those first years.
Well, we had our family. We lost a set of twins, and then we had Nick, and then we lost a little boy.
Oh, I had no idea, Stu.
And
So the twins, and I apologize to kind of cut you off right there. Did they carry to term? Did you lose them at birth? What?
They were a little early.
Little early.
Uh-huh.
And then everything went okay with Nick.
Yeah.
And then little boy after Nick.
Uh-huh.
Same deal. Came a little early or something different.
Yeah, he was closer to full term, but anyway.
Yeah.
He was just
that's
didn't
heartbreaking.
make it.
I had no idea.
Yeah.
So you get Nick, then you lose a boy, and then what does it look
And
like?
then we had Eric.
Eric, okay.
And then we had Ruby.
Yeah.
And then we had Greg.
Mm-hmm.
Then we had Kristen.
Yeah.
So we end up with 3 boys and 2 girls.
Yeah. Beautiful family, good set of folks. So I don't know that I've met Kristen. I believe I've met everyone else at least once at some point along the way, and Greg's always here running shoot side with us. Yeah. So what was it like raising them here on the ranch, raising your kids?
Well, it was a good deal. I mean, this is a great place to raise kids. Delmas and I, it was about the 25th of March, somewhere there. He and I went out to feed, and we got to the stack yard, and he opened the gate, and I pulled in, loaded just over the fence to the hay rack, and then we'd go out and pitch it off. He'd drive and pitch it off. So I loaded it and came back and hooked onto the tractor, and when he walked around there, he said, when I shut that gate, I had a real bad pain in my arm. I said, well, how are you doing now? And he says, oh, I'm okay now. So he climbed up in the tractor and sit on the seat for a minute, and I climbed up on the hay. But I see him sit there, and then he kind of gradually starts to go down. So I jumped off the hay and opened the door of the tractor. And I says, are you okay? And he says, well, I'm not feeling very good. And I says, well, let's get you out of this tractor. So he got out, walked over to the front wheel and just put his hands on it and braced himself and died right there.
Oh, my word.
So by then, or shortly after that, we hired another fellow that had a wife and a bunch of kids. And so we relied a lot on those kids.
Yeah.
His kids and our kids.
And to pause you for just a moment, how long had you and Diane been married when you lost your father-in-law like that?
8 years.
8 years. So hadn't had quite all your kids yet then, or they were all here, still having kids at that point, just getting settled in and going.
Yeah.
8 years, and then he's gone.
Yeah.
So it all goes to you 8 years in, or you're running everything. You're in charge at that point. How was that?
It was a very scary thought.
Yeah, I'd say it's a lot of weight, all at once, especially because I'd imagine, unexpected. How old was Delmas?
He was 65, 66, 67, right in there.
Right in there.
Yeah, so he wasn't old.
And a heart attack, I guess, is what it was. Yeah. And so that kind of happens one day to the next. You're into management. So then you hired, you mentioned a young family and some kids,
Yeah,
and they kind of came in to maybe
Yeah.
pick up the slack or fill the void
Yeah.
of what Delmas had left.
yeah, and he worked for us for 20 some odd years.
Wow.
They still live in Lake Town. He was from Nevada and she was from Korean or over in that area.
Okay. What were their names? I'm not sure if I've met them.
Les and Lois Astle.
Les and Lois. I'm not sure if I met them, but okay.
And
20-something
I
years,
had,
though, that he worked here.
huh?
20-something years,
Yeah.
you're saying. Yeah.
I had kind of an interesting experience because, I'd never had any experience hiring anyone.
Sure.
And there didn't seem to be anyone around here that was interested. But there was a man from here that worked for the employment agency in Salt Lake.
Mm-hmm.
So I called him, and he says, well, we've got some here. I'll send a couple up.
Mm-hmm.
So he sent the first one up, and he said, a nice guy, he said, well, I played a lot of basketball, and I was good in football, and I'm really anxious to get started in team roping now. And he went on and on like that, and I said, well, okay, I'll let you know. Well, then when Les came, he said, I need a job,
Yeah.
and I need one now.
Yeah.
And I've worked for my uncle, and I think I can do you a good job.
Yeah.
And I said, well, let me think about it a couple of days. He called me every day. You decided anything? And then I knew who we wanted.
Yeah.
Yeah. And he just worked his heart out. He was so good.
Yeah.
But, he just wore out. I mean,
Sure.
these ranches they're a big responsibility, and they're a lot of work.
Mm-hmm.
And we were young, and we did work hard.
Yeah.
But anyway, we're still real good friends.
So at that point in time, so looking right at when Delmas passed and then you hired in, the name one more time
Les
was
Astle.
Les.
Mm-hmm.
So at that point in time, what did the cow herd look like? Had the numbers built up yet, or was it still just a few Herefords, or what?
There was
herd
about
look like?
300
About 300 or so. Commercial Hereford
Yeah.
primarily at that point?
Hereford cows, and then there was, maybe 25 registered Herefords.
Okay. But pretty well all red baldies then at
Yeah.
that point in time. Is that
Before-
everything you'd see around the valley? Was
Yeah.
red baldies at that point?
These guys had Angus before then,
Okay.
but I had another thought I was going to tell you.
I say.
This is what I was going to say.
Perfect. I say go to that, because anything I say is completely inconsequential relative. You have a thought. You just tell me, be quiet a minute. You tell me that story.
we had all Herefords, and Delmas. By this time, there was starting to be a little crossbreeding, and Delmas went and bought 2 yearling black bulls,
Okay.
and we thought, boy, this is going to be fun to see what happens. And that first year, we got 6 black calves.
Oh,
Out of
really?
the 2 of them.
Out of the 2 of them.
Yeah.
Well, that's disappointing.
But we thought, well, and it was mostly Delmas says, well, I think we need to try him another year.
Yeah.
Give him another chance.
Right.
And so we did. And then the next year we just got more calves, and you could imagine. I think they just got whipped, and
Early on, they weren't able to get in and breed
Yeah.
anything. Just get
Yeah.
whipped by the big old Hereford bulls.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that makes sense. But then after that, they went to breeding, and that's.
Yeah.
Did you continue to add blacks from there on
Yeah.
out?
Off and on.
Yeah.
Now we're pretty well all blacks, but it's just been the last 4 or 5 years that we haven't run any Herefords.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. We've even put a Hereford into the AI
Yeah.
project, the Victorious Bull here a couple years ago.
Yeah.
But yep. So Les comes into the picture, starts helping. You're raising your kids here. Your kids grew up working here. His kids would have grown up to an extent working here. How old were they when Les came to work for you, his kids?
They weren't very old. I should mention this.
Yeah, please do.
The fall before my father-in-law passed away, I was over to the end of the valley, just gone over there to get something or help someone, and the guy that had the ranch over there said he had lost a leg, and so he was pretty well incapacitated. But he said, how would you like to lease this place?
Oh.
And so I said, oh, I'd love it. So I come home and told Delmas. Delmas says, listen, if you're looking for more work, I can fix you right up. And I'll never forget, he didn't want me to do it. But I said to him, listen, when you were my age, did you ever want to have something of your own?
Yeah.
And he thought about it a minute, and he said, go ahead. So we did. That was in 1975, and
Okay.
we've leased it ever since.
Yeah. Yeah. So
see,
that's that K brand.
Yeah.
Okay.
So this year will be the 50th year
Of that lease.
that we've leased that.
Interesting. So at that point in time, Delmas had his herd. You worked for Delmas here, helping run that. The opportunity came up to lease. You personally took on that lease and are running that in addition to running your father-in-law's cows. How long after you took on that lease did your father-in-law pass away?
About 6 months.
Oh, it was right there.
Yeah.
Right at that same time frame.
And it was kind of interesting because, I didn't even own a pickup. And I said, if I'm going to run it, I sure need access to a pickup. Is there any way I could pay you for a little rent on this? He had a GMC pickup, two-wheel drive, of course.
Yeah, yeah.
And he said, oh, yeah, we can handle that some way. But he never lived long enough to really, get into that. But we kept good records and tried to make sure that it didn't cost the ranch anything for us to lease that.
Sure.
And it works good because their range is in with our range. And so if we weren't leasing it, someone else would be. This way we can kind of control, how much grazing we do on it and take care of it a little better.
Hey guys, this is Seth Christensen with the Got Any Cows podcast. I appreciate you guys being here today. We are in bull leasing season. We have bulls that are ready to go today. These are from the front edge of our Akaushi breeding program. These are embryo transfer bulls that are 18 months old and ready to breed cows anywhere in the country. Our lease program is unique, especially in the sense that we offer a 2-year lease option. To take advantage of that 2-year lease, you're able to get into one of these top-notch bulls that can easily cost $10,000 plus for just $4,000 for a 2-year breeding season lease. You're able to take that bull and receive delivery of him directly to your ranch with the delivery included in the purchase price of that lease. So for just $4,000, you're getting a $10,000 plus valued bull arriving at your ranch to breed your cows for the next 2 years. Now is the time. Breeding season is upon us. It is peak breeding season right now. Here at Spring in the Rockies, we are in the middle of getting cattle bred. And if you want one of these top-notch red Wagyu or Akaushi bulls breeding your cows, I want you to reach out to me. Please shoot me a text at 208-589-9988. One more time, that number's 208-589-9988. Shoot me a text and let's get a bull headed your direction for this spring breeding season. So 50 years. You were saying 50 years this year or just past? Or about this year is 50 years of that lease. There's not very many of a lot of different things that last 50 years, What do you think has been the key to having because I'd imagine there's probably been some generational transfers there.
Yeah.
What has that looked like to keep a lease relationship intact for 50 years? So you leased the ranch, you leased the cows, all of that. What was that as far as, I guess, the acreage or the grazing permits or the cattle? What all was entailed in the lease? And then what has it taken to keep that intact or keep that relationship functional for both parties for that long?
Well, I'll tell you what I think the key is you just have to live a life of very, very integrity, I'm not saying that just right, but you have to be able to trust the person that you're leasing from, and they have to be able to trust you. And they have to know that when you go over in the fall to settle up, that you're going to be honest and you're going to do whatever it takes to keep them happy. And they were the same way. So it made a good combination.
Yeah, yeah. How many, at the time you went and leased it, how many cows and what kind of acres did they come with? How did that all work?
They had 70 cows, And then they had about 2,500 acres of rangeland and about 300 acres or so of farmland.
Gotcha. And you leased it all.
Uh-huh.
Hmm. And you've run it same straight through. And then
Yeah.
your animals all run in common now. You know, whether
Mm-hmm.
it's your brand, which would be what's the name for your brand again, Stu?
Well,
for the Kearl Ranch. Well, for this
that,
because that other's the Kearl Ranch too, right? That you leased.
yeah,
So two different ranches from two different branches of the family.
yeah,
Yeah. Yep.
uh-huh.
Yep.
Two different wives of
Right.
that.
Right.
Uh-huh.
Yep.
They, Delmas used to call our brand a double Jew's harp. Now, most people don't know what a double Jew's harp is, and so they call it a dog bone.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so we're used to hearing dog bone, and
Uh-huh.
sometimes we say it too.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. I say because that is, I mean, if for someone like me coming in and looking at it, never having seen a double Jew's harp or even knowing what a Jew's harp is, you know, it
Yeah.
it looks kind of like unto a dog bone, and
Yeah.
that's the brand that's been with this ranch. Would that go all the way back through? Do you know where that would
You
go
know,
back to?
I've
Which
tried
owner?
to find out, but I've never been able to.
Yeah.
But I'm really anxious to know when it got started. I know they used it on their sheep because there's some sheep brands here.
Yeah, yeah. So for
So-
sure, at least Delmas used it.
Oh, yeah.
Probably Alfred, maybe James, something somewhere
Yeah.
back in there.
Mm-hmm.
Gotcha. And then the K brand, that's the rib brand, that came with the lease, or that's
Yeah.
the lease brand.
Yeah.
And that's for Kearl, is where
Uh-huh.
that comes from.
And we, the way that works is basically we own the cows. But if they ever called for them back,
Right,
we'd want some with their brand on.
right. Yep.
So that's the way that works.
That makes sense. That makes sense. Yep.
So we run them on the forest with our forest permit, and we do it in our name.
Mm-hmm.
And if you look on the ear tag in the cow's ears, it's going to say my name. But if the day ever come when one or the other of us said, you know, we need to do something different, then we'd want some cows for them that we could turn back with their brand on.
So there'd be 70 or so in the
Yeah.
herd at any point in time carrying a K. That if
Mhm.
you needed to, you could say, hey, here's your 70 cows, your 300 acres of farm ground out, and this 2,500 of range.
Yeah,
And they could do whatever they wanted with it.
yeah.
Yep, that makes sense. So as you structured that lease, how did you structure it, I guess, simple enough or executable enough that it's kept both parties happy that long? I mean, did you come up with a flat rate? Did you come up with a percentage? How did you structure it to take care of both parties and make it easy to execute back-to-back years for 50 consecutive years?
The guy that had the leg taken off, that owned the ranch, had a brother that was an ag economist over at the University of Wyoming. And so he got him to come over.
Gotcha.
And we went through it. As far as the cows go, we pay an interest on the value. As far as the hay goes, it's a percent. It's a 40-60. We get to 60.
Yep.
Any grain, it's 50-50.
Yep.
So I felt like the guy was really fair, really
Yeah.
honest.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
I think they do too.
Right. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Huh. That's interesting. So as you look at your time that you spent here raising your family and managing this ranch, and I mean, there'd be just hours and hours worth of stories. I mean, you've spent a lifetime on this ranch. What would you say, I guess, any story, number one, would be any stories in particular that you have in mind you want to share? Because if I don't wait for me to ask the right question, just share the right stories. But I will mention behind that, I guess number two, just anything that stands out within both, I guess, how you raised your family and or how you chose to run this ranch that you think have been important parts of why it's all still intact today and why you've got your son here shoot side with you, breeding heifers with me all these years later.
Well, I'll say this. Going into this deal, one of the things that I thought was really important was that we maintain the buildings. And I'm a poor carpenter, but we've spent quite a bit of time working these buildings over. When they built the horse barn, the cow barn, the machine shed, all of those, they went to the east side of the lake. and hauled big rocks back with a team and wagon.
Wow.
And then they stacked them, so most of them were stacked about 4 feet high.
Mm-hmm.
And they built the building on those rocks. And so, of course, over time, those rocks have, sloughed off and broke up. And so we've poured cement foundations under all of them.
Mm-hmm.
And that's been important. We've been able to add a little land wherever it was possible. We wanted to do that.
Mm-hmm.
But Diane's family, of course, owns some in this.
Mm-hmm.
And her uncle's family owns some in this. So we started right in. It was incorporated, so we started right in buying stock.
Mm-hmm.
And so over the years, we've just spent every penny buying stock.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And when it come time to, we got down to where it was just her sisters that were still in. And Diane's grandfather, Alfred, had bought a piece of land that sit up on the forest. And so we finally made the decision, well, we've got to sell that if we're going to get the sisters paid off.
Mm-hmm.
And so we did. And we've been able to buy enough to put back in it, so it's pretty much the same size.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But I think the one thing that, you have to realize going into these ranches, and I'm sure that you'll agree with this, is you have to pretty well commit yourself to spending your lifetime here. And as far as a lot of vacations, you're probably going to have to forego some of those things. Now, looking back on it, I think maybe we forewent too many of them.
Sure.
Because, I'm to the point now, I wish we'd gone to Bryce Canyon and the Grand Canyon and some of those sites. But anyway, it's still been good.
Mm-hmm.
We've gone on some vacations, but not a lot of them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yep. It is, I look for me, or really for any visitor that comes to the ranch, we get to just come and enjoy it for a couple days, and it's a beautiful place and an impressive operation. Really enjoy working with you and your family here. But like you've mentioned to me on several occasions, all the things that remain to be done, all the work that it entails to have this ranch be what it is. Are there anything else, I guess, experiences as you look back on your tenure here, on managing this ranch, building this ranch, raising your family here? Any stories or experiences or thoughts that come to mind of that time that you'd like to share?
Well, there's a few funny ones. I might mention one.
You bet, please do.
Les and I were up in the hills moving some cattle, and Diane had made us a lunch. And so we're riding along, if you can picture us, we're riding along behind these cows, and it gets to be 12, and then it gets to be 1. I hollered over to him and says, "Hey, don't you think it's time we got something to eat?" He says, "Yeah, I'll undo the bag that it's in and hand you a sandwich." So he turns around in the saddle and unzips the deal that's on the back of the saddle and starts digging in there. And when he does, if you can imagine a potato chips bag and the way it rattles, it started to rattle, and that horse lit into bucking. And Les was around backwards with a handful of potato chips in his hand, and he was no match for that horse. But Les was such a good sport, and of course he got thrown off.
Yeah.
But he got up again, got on the horse, and away we went. But it was, to watch it, it was just so comical.
I'd have a hard time staying on, sitting forward and with both hands, with a good grip on something.
Yeah.
And much less being backwards with a handful of potato chips when the horse took off. Oh, that's funny.
So that's one that comes to mind.
Yeah.
But I've talked a lot. I've probably told all I
Oh
should.
no, I say it's important. You know, I think a lot of times we don't take the time to sit down and do anything like this. To remember, there's so much to do. You know, even just like I was talking with Greg while we're up there shoot siding, we're here breeding all these heifers, but there's irrigation going on, and there's turnout going on, and there's fencing going on. So I appreciate you sitting down with me at all. But I think just like you mentioned, even with things, you know, like vacations or whatever else, there's always so many other things to do. It's just so difficult to fit those things in. But it's one of the things I've really enjoyed about this podcast at large, even if all we do is take an hour here or whatever, but we get some of these stories. You know, it's important to take time for it at one point, because at some point for any of us, there isn't more time. We don't get more time to tell the story, or to record it, or to put it together, you know. If you were looking at, I guess, the business side of what you've done here, as far as keeping this cow herd intact and adding land and buying out family and things like that, what would you say have been just some key components of building a ranch? And truthfully, it is it's more than just a ranch, and that's what makes the story here neat. It's a legacy that's gone through generations. You know, for your wife's family, I mean, generation after generation after generation, it stayed intact and it stayed in the family. It's a working cattle ranch. You know what I mean? This isn't a vacation rental property. I mean, this is a working cattle ranch. What do you think have been some of the keys to making a living running cattle and keeping the ranch intact through your whole career?
Well, I think that you have to be conservative. You have to be so careful with your finances, because right now is a good example. Cattle are so high right now, and if you buy something, if you buy land or anything else, it's going to be high too.
Yeah.
And there's nothing to say that tomorrow the cattle won't start to plummet.
Right. Yep.
So you have to be real careful.
Yeah.
I'll tell you one thing we did was on that piece of land that we ended up selling, there were some real good pine trees. And about that time, there was a guy came along. He says, "We see that you got some good timber to harvest, and we'd like to do it."
Yeah.
And so we ended up selling it to him, and they came and got it. And I said to myself and to the rest of the family, I want to take some of that money and buy a good swather. And so we bought a self-propelled New Holland swather and just loved it. And I remember we paid $14,000 for it. And when we did, I remember saying, well, I'll do this once, but I won't do it again. But anyway, when Diane's uncle that was in on this, he came to see us one time and he said, "I'd like you to take me up where we harvested that timber." He says, "I'd like to get a look at it." And so I took him up, and you know, if you're used to being around timber harvest places, you know that it looks basically like a disaster. There's stumps and there's trees laying around, and although these guys did an excellent job, but we got up there, and of course he was used to seeing it the way it was before. So he got out of the truck and he looked around and this way and that way, and then he said to me, "Well, I'll tell you what." He says, "I'm older than you, and I suspect that I'll die before you will. And as soon as I get up there, I will start trying to soften up Alfred so that he'll let you in when he gets there, when you get there."
You know, it is funny, and that's a good story. But you know, it brings to mind for me, it just, I guess, reminds me of, there is kind of a little bit different pressure of the, you know, you've had a father-in-law and his father before him and his father before him that have put all this together, and there's this pressure to keep it all intact and keep it all just so. How have you handled that through your career, in the sense of, you've mentioned all the things you have done to try to, you know, maintain the property, improve the property, you know, expand the ranch, but also just, I guess, to mentally handle that weight. You know, it's an honor, I guess, but a weight, a responsibility of that legacy that came ahead of you. How have you gone about handling that, or has that ever, I guess, played into your thought processes with
things? It
really
has. And so I'll tell you this: the greatest asset I have had running this place has been Diane, because she, you know, I'd spent 8 years here, and she'd spent 30.
Yeah.
And she was always involved. She's a great horse rider. She doesn't do much anymore. She's had a couple of new knees, and they don't work. But she, you know, she's been involved enough growing up that if there was any problem, why, she usually knew how to handle it.
Yeah.
So that's been a real blessing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Looking forward, looking at your kids and at the different roles that they play within the ranch and how it operates. Greg's here day to day, and then your other children remain involved. What would you say to them, I guess, looking at them running the ranch going forward? What would be your hope for them? I mean, if you were to look at this ranch in another 50 years, you know, and see your kids and then your kids running it, things like that, what would be some of your hopes for them and or words of advice for them as they carry on the legacy you leave?
Well, my hope is that they would work to keep the place together. You know, when it comes time for them to go their way, and each of them would be a different way, whether they stayed here or they didn't. It's so important that they can get along.
Yeah.
I think if they can get along, that they'll be able to work together. But it's a worry. It really is.
Sure.
I was very sensitive to that all the time that, you know, I've been there, just because I didn't want them to say, hey, yeah, the place did fine till Wamsley came along.
Yeah. You bet. It's a lot of weight going forward. So Greg's here day to day with you. Walk us through kind of some of what Greg does, maybe with the hunting and things like that, and then how do you guys navigate being father and son, but also working together all day, every day? How do you guys handle that?
We get along pretty good.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you know, you have to realize, both of you have to realize going into it, that, hey, I'm not always going to get my way.
Sure.
Now, I've had quite a few years here, and I know almost everything, but not quite. And tell you the truth, it's been kind of surprising. Greg has come up with some excellent ideas that we've incorporated that, you know, I don't think I would have thought of.
Yeah, absolutely.
The one thing that worries me is Greg is the best guy in the world, but he's single.
Sure.
So if he stays here, you know, how do we make the next transition? And of course I won't be around, but
Sure.
But that could be even more difficult.
Sure. I'll tell you what, I've mentioned to you before, I mean, we have, my wife and I both, from the time we got married up until the time we bought our ranch, I mean, we AI'd cows a lot of places for a lot of people. That was how we paid our way through school, bought our ranch, you know, started to build our deal over there. And we AI'd a lot of cows. And there's a lot of places I don't necessarily care to go again. You know, we did it because we needed to at that time. But I've always been so impressed by you and Greg and Frank and a lot of you here helping as well, just how well you guys are able to, I don't know, there's always maintained, while we're working hard, we're hustling through, getting done what needs done, but there's always been maintained a level of dignity and respect here at the ranch that you don't see everywhere. Quite often it gets to the point where, well, this job is way more important than the people, or people get pretty ignorant or ornery or rude or out of line in the workplace, right? Because we're hustling or whatever. And I've always appreciated that about you and Greg and your family here, that you guys do. I mean, you guys work as hard as anybody, but you don't have, I've never felt like you guys feel the need to be ignorant or rude or ornery while you're doing it. And that's not the case everywhere. There's a lot of tough guys out there, you know? And I don't bother to go AI those cows anymore. I guess, but walk us through that just to kind of wrap up here at the tail end, and I'll tell one story before you do answer this question, but specific to, I guess, thinking through AI, and kind of what made you decide to engage in that or why we're still doing it 11 years later. But I'll throw in a quick story here, to your credit, because it's how I ended up sitting in this chair and on this ranch, but I went on my mission when I was 19 years old. It was called to serve mission for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in Nicaragua. And at the time, I was saving up my money to be able to go and do that. And I had my money together and I was ready to go and serve. And I get down into the MTC there, the Missionary Training Center, like en route to we're going to Nicaragua, and find out that a bull I had sold that was going to fund about the last quarter of my mission, the sale fell through. And the gentleman didn't come through that had committed to buy this bull before I left. So I was going to be short some money. I wasn't going to have the funds I needed to complete those 2 years of service in Nicaragua. And anyway, and I was worried about it, but it's like, well, what am I going to do? I'm down here being a missionary. I'm not going to sell a bull anywhere. And anyway, you had met my grandpa, there in the temple in Logan, had met my grandpa Verl and got to know each other, and that story had made its way to you. And all of a sudden I got a heads up while I'm out there being a missionary, like, hey, Grandpa has a friend from the temple that might have use for a bull, and we can get this bull sold. And I was just so grateful, to have that weight off my shoulders and go focus on that service in Nicaragua, and on sharing the gospel there and inviting people to come to Christ. But while I was there, I thought, man, I need to come home and make sure I go say thank you, to this gentleman that bought my bull. And that was you, And so I came home in 2014. So that would be 11 years ago now, and got home midsummer there, and somewhere thereafter came over and to say thanks for buying the bull and see how he was doing. And that was my first time here on Kearl Ranch. And I mentioned to you I was going to school at Utah State, just like you did, and saying, hey, I'm looking to AI a whole bunch of cows anywhere I can to kind of, pay my way through school and build out the ranch didn't exist yet. I had some cows, but that was kind of it. And anyway, and you were gracious enough to bring me on the next spring, and you haven't managed to shake me since. I keep coming back, and AI and all the heifers here, a couple hundred heifers a year since 2015 would have been the first time we did that. But coming around, I guess, your end of all that, walk me through what made you decide to bother to AI heifers, and then what keeps you doing it year over year.
Well, let me say first that when Verl Christensen approached me wondering if we'd buy a bull, I knew that he was a good man. I mean, he's one of those guys you can just feel it.
Yeah.
And so I said, well, I'll look at it. But I knew that it would be just what he said, and it was. And it was a good bull. Mm-hmm. We were glad to get it. We really were.
Actually, I'm going to pause you real quick right there, because just as you mentioned it, that bull, random side note, but there's always one that comes up in the middle of a story.
Yeah.
Before I forget, that bull was one of our very first embryo transfer bulls we ever produced. Like one of the first two we ever produced via embryo transfer. He was a son of a bull called EXT. And this logo that sits all over everything I ever wear, the outline of that bull is N-Bar Emulation EXT, which would be the sire of this bull you got.
Is that right?
Yeah, embryo transfer bull number 2. But anyway, it's one of those, I hadn't thought about it at all till you mentioned he was a good bull, and he was, anyway. And I didn't mean to jump right in there, but I thought before I forget, just a fun sidebar. Yeah. Everything I ever wear has the sire of that bull on it. But, so yeah, you got the EXT bull, and he was a good one.
And we really hadn't thought too much about AI, but you came along, and I don't know whether you remember this, but you asked if we were interested, and I said no, I didn't think we was. And then as I thought about it after you left, I knew you was a good man, and I thought, I think we could do that without too much problem. And so that's how we started. But I want to mention this. You say, how do we get along? And so I'll mention a couple of things. I'm a great believer in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And I know that it is our Father in Heaven's plan for happiness. And I think that I'm really fortunate because it's been years since I've heard any kind of a swear word on this place when we're out working. And it just makes a nice environment. And I think because we don't get carried away with the swear words, that we don't get as mad as we would otherwise. So, be that as it may, I don't think it's so much us as it is the plan that our Father in Heaven's given us.
You bet. I have always been impressed by that, Stu, because I am not perfect at always minding my tongue. But I tell you what, when my wife went and worked all these AI projects with me, because we took every project we could get for a lot of years there to build this thing. And there were an awful lot of places that got pretty crude, pretty vulgar, pretty fast. You know what I mean? And people were just consistently out of line. And frankly, I'm just not comfortable taking my wife into a work environment like that.
Yeah.
I get far enough out of line on my own, and I don't get near so far out as you would see. And so, you know how it is. Some of these high pressure situations, especially, you're working cattle and working them fast, and it can be dangerous and it's physically demanding. And anyway, people can lose their cool pretty quick. But I have always been impressed, like I mentioned, because even, for me, it's not something I'm perfect at. But I've always been darn impressed. You guys have got as many excuses to cuss as anybody. Pretty darn good at minding your tongues.
Well, I do think that it has a real effect on how mad you get if you start swearing and cussing and using the vulgar expressions.
Yep. I appreciate that. So I guess kind of to wrap up, are there any, I guess, stories that I have done a poor job of setting up the right question for, or anything else that something you thought of, I guess, coming into sitting down here that, I'd like to share this, but that Christensen kid forgot to ask the right question or whatever. That'd be one thing. But then two, to, I guess, wrap up I'll just even mention on the AI and everything else, I guess, benefits you've seen from that, and or what keeps you doing it as far as just today, after all that history, all that legacy, all those things that have come into building and running this cow herd. What keeps you doing that one thing that has me sitting?
Okay, well, I'll tell you. We take 2 or 3 farm magazines, and I don't read them cover to cover, but I read the articles that interest me.
Yeah.
And very often there's an article in there saying, we got all these great AI sires, and the beef people don't use them. Mm-hmm. And so, I kind of been thinking about that and thinking, hey, if we can do that with no more trouble than we have, I think we ought to be.
It's only about 7% of beef producers that employ it.
Oh, is it really?
Mm-hmm. In the United States. Yep.
Well, and I think, we sell some of these AI heifers.
Yeah.
And we get a little more for them.
Yep.
But I think the people that buy them really like them. Mm-hmm. And so it helps us market them.
You bet.
And we've really enjoyed working with you. Appreciate and I didn't realize it was 11 years. I knew it was quite a while.
Yeah, year 11 that we just 242 heifers. I figure we're coming up on. I mean, I ought to look here and see. I mean, but it'd be thousands that we've bred now here. But and it does show. People will ask me. So in our embryo transfer program, the quality of our recipients is as dialed in as it is, and as good a cattle as they are. And it's because we won't take them from just anywhere. I've bought them a lot of different places. I've brought them in from a series of different sources. We've tested a lot of things, just the same as we have within our genetics and our marketing program. But when it comes to the recipients we get here, it's not just like, I like Stu and they're nice cows or whatever, but I've been here for 11 years. I know at least a component of the genetics that are in a large, at this point, AI, a couple thousand of them, there's at least a few out there that have got a pretty decent chunk of that influence to them. And then each year, now as we're bringing in bulls and then bringing recips back over for our embryo transfer program, it is neat to see just the quality of those cattle and that it's a known commodity versus having something that, who knows how good those animals are or aren't going to be.
Yeah.
They've been pretty consistently good for us. We've been happy with them.
Oh, they have. Those we've got really have been,
Yeah.
too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I appreciate that. Anything else that you'd like to throw in, Stu, that I maybe glossed over or missed?
Well, I would just say this, because you mentioned that this might go to people that are just beginning in the cattle business.
You bet.
And so I might mention this. It's so important not to lose your temper when you're working with livestock. It just makes all the difference in the world. Mm-hmm. And I don't like our guys to jab them with those sticks. Mm-hmm. If they have to tap them a little on the back, that's fine. Mm-hmm. But when we're working them, and for instance, we're trying to get them through a gate, and you know that the cow hasn't seen the gate, or she'd run through, so she's trying to run back over you. Mm-hmm. And you want to, as soon as she gets close to her, well, let's beat the life out of her, and then she'll go. But that almost always is not the case. Mm-hmm. If the cow can see the open gate, she's going to go.
Yep. Absolutely.
So anyway.
It makes all the difference, because when you have animals that have been handled right their whole lives, those animals, I can work them safely, because we monkey with the cows we're doing embryo transfer on. We are working with more than any sane person ever would. We're in those cattle a lot. But to do that safely for me and my crew, but also when those animals are confirmed pregnant, carrying an embryo calf, and we sell them to somebody that maybe is just starting or just getting into cattle, for them to handle those cattle safely, honestly has as much to do with how you're handling them here prior to ever entering the embryo transfer program as it does with anything else thereafter. So I think that's really it keeps people and cattle safe.
It does.
If
really
tempers
does.
can be kept in check, because they do learn. Cattle will get trained to be mellow or get trained to be hot, or to be difficult to handle.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I appreciate you doing that, and it does. It makes all the difference. Being around cattle that are handled right, and then I really appreciated, like you mentioned, with that lease that you run for 50 years, being able to trust people and working with people you trust. And if I was to say, the two things that we do our dangdest to do within the business I run is to provide animals that are safe to handle, because not all animals are. Animals that are safe to handle. And I want to do all I can to earn the trust of the people we deal with, that they know they can bank on us or count on us, or that if they do business with me, that I'll be honest with them,
Mm-hmm.
And it's not always going to go perfect. There's going to be challenges, there's going to be hiccups, there's going to be snags, but you'll find out pretty quick who you can and can't trust when you run into those situations.
Yeah.
So. Anything else you'd throw in, Stu, or you think that about wraps her up?
I think I've pretty well told you everything I know.
Perfect. Well, that's pretty good. That's you and me both. I think we're there, my friend. Thank you for taking the time, Stu. I know it's a busy time. Appreciate you doing it.
It's been fun.
Thanks a bunch. Thanks for joining us for this episode of the Got Any Cows podcast. Be sure to subscribe, rate, and review wherever you get your podcasts. And visit us anytime at gotanycows.com.